What knowledge was kept secret for a great reason? Story 1. The fact that the Enigma coding machine had been cracked. Following work performed by Polish codebreakers, the codebreakers at Bletchley Park were able to crack the German codes and were aware of pretty much everything the Germans were doing by the end of World War II. The Allies were rightly worried that if anyone knew that Enigma had been cracked, that the Germans would change their codes. So the Allies used a load of ridiculous methods to cover their tracks, like sending scouting planes over naval convoys that they already knew about from cracking the codes, just so there would be a reasonable excuse when the convoy was then attacked. Very few people knew that ultra information actually came from them, cracking the Enigma code, though, and several countries continued to use Enigma machines for years after the war had ended. Story 2. This is going to sound crazy, but like the entry into the Blizzard server rooms, my professor in school worked for them for a hot minute, and he said that in order to get access to the room, you had to get another person with the same access level as you, and get on both sides of the doors and basically synchronize when you turn the keys in order to gain access. Of course, this makes sense when you see that there are well over 1 million people who have credit cards on record that play WoW, and also what my professor called modified C++ classes and libraries, which to me essentially means the bread and butter of what makes WoW WoW. I know this isn't like atomic bombs or anything, but I find it interesting that they kept it so locked up inside their building. Story 3. The fact that you don't learn ethical hacking standards or really how to hack until the upper levels of computer science. I know you could, in a roundabout way, learn how to do this very easily on the internet, but I think sometimes there are reasons that current hacking methods aren't readily available on the internet. Like if I look at my password cache on my iPhone, it says that most of them are compromised, but I've only ever had an account hacked 2 times. One was because I sold my Xbox as a teenager and didn't sign out of my profile. And one was some guy, I assume, bought my password in a Steam leak for my Steam account and signed into my Steam account from a country in South America, like Venezuela or something. I can't remember. It's really not good just to have a tutorial for easy ways to hack without an absolute reason to. Like security checking for a company that is paying you to patch holes in their security. Databases get hacked every year, and if they made this stuff just readily available in tech school or the internet, I feel like it would get really bad. I feel like this is also the reason it is so hard to find in-depth guides on how to write SQL code. It's very difficult to find basic syntax rules that explain the little details of SQL online. And I have had it for 3 classes already, and none of them have had a textbook on how to do it. If you know SQL well enough, or even know what specific language something is written in, you can almost always break it somehow. At least that's what my professor, who is a cybersecurity guy, says. Like when they first made the internet, I've heard it said many times that people just generally used to trust each other on it. It was supposed to be a golden rule type of thing to interact with each other on here, and it wasn't until people started doing pranks that made the idea that malicious activity was possible until people actually started doing malicious activity. The internet was supposed to be a safe place for information, not a place my grandmother has to worry about losing her SSI check that's in her bank account that she uses with her debit card because she's scared. Story 4. Luke Skywalker and Mark Hamill's involvement in the finale of S2 The Mandalorian. My favorite thing isn't that it was kept secret. It's that they totally set it up as another character returning, who we saw getting shot down and going in a fiery crash in a scene that took place around 30 years earlier. I don't know what they were told about this character's return, but that never leaked. It was all meant to avoid a leak of the real reveal. I know I would have had a crap ton of questions about this ending, and nothing ever leaked. I just find it really funny. Poor Mark Hamill, keeping huge Star Wars secrets for 50 years now. Story 5. Neither the participants nor the experimenters know who is receiving a particular treatment and who is in the control group on a double-blind scientific study in order to prevent bias in research results. Randomized double-blind trials are the base of modern medicine. Pure scientific data, uncorrupted by personal bias or monetary interest, is invaluable to our society. Those trials are the best source nowadays. I wish governments would refer to them instead of personal knowledge when making health decisions. Story 6. Silk production. For 3 millennia, the Chinese state held a near-global monopoly on the production of silk. Most people outside China thought silk came from a plant rather than a worm. Attempting to export silkworms or their eggs was punishable by death in order to maintain the monopoly. Silk production in China dates back to at least 30 BC, but the secrets of silk production didn't leak out of the country until over 3,000 years later. It comes from a plant too, lotus silk. It's a dying art of tapestry. As someone from Vietnam who knows local artisan businesses that make lotus silk, it's not really a dying art. The problem is that it takes literally 2 months for an artist to make even just a scarf, and we don't have fresh lotus stems available all year as raw materials. So you end up with a limited number of people who know how to do it, a limited amount of time to do it before your raw materials rot, and not many people with FU money to actually purchase the final product. Yes, it's expensive for obvious reasons. Story 7. My astronomy professor in first year told my class about the very high probability that gravitational waves had been detected a week before they were officially announced. I was working at CERN when the Higgs boson discovery was announced. The ATLAS and CMS results were meant to be secret within each of the experiments. The days leading up to the press conference, there was a bit of a buzz in the air. Everyone is planning barbecues for the evening and stockpiling champagne, all for no particular reason, of course. Which meant that he probably kept tabs in the right communities. Quite often, the discoveries are open secrets, that is. They'll be like, we've analyzed our data and our results indicate that our theory has been proven. We've got other reliable places currently reviewing and critiquing our analysis and results before we make the announcement confirming what we've found. Story 8. This isn't super cool, but back in middle school, my best friend's mom worked for some sort of vending machine company and got to try Snickers peanut butter before it came out to the public. So I just got to try a pretty good candy bar a few weeks before it was released to everyone else. I once read a murder mystery where this guy ends up with his annoying stepdaughter and leaves her in a remote location with a candy bar wrapper from a candy bar that another company is putting out in a few weeks. The murderer works for the advertising agency of the candy company. The plan is that since the candy bar is only coming out in a few weeks when the body gets found, he'll have an alibi because there's no way the body could have ended up there before the candy bar was released to the general public. However, the candy bar company is having second thoughts about putting out their candy bar because the test group says the candy bar is pretty revolting. So our murderer goes back to the remote location to remove the candy bar wrapper. While there, a rock falls on his head and he dies too. Ironic twist. In the end, the candy bar company puts out the candy bar anyway. But it's a huge failure because it's pretty revolting. Story 9. Back in 2012, I knew WF was opening unauthorized banking accounts. A banker opened 9 unauthorized business checking and savings accounts in my name. I became very suspicious when I received 9 debit cards in the mail in the following weeks. I panicked thinking someone stole my identity. I had to go to 3 WF banks before someone told me they had their suspicions that the banker was just trying to hit her monthly quotas for a bonus. I freaked out and made them close all accounts. My husband is still convinced I was one of the first whistleblowers. Story 10. I do consulting work for a major automaker. I've known about new cars and seen pictures weeks before details were revealed. People are looking at crappy camo spy shots and speculating about specs on Jalopnik and R/cars while I have high-res images and full specs. As a car guy, it's kind of cool knowing before everyone else. In this respect, I currently work for a company that does prints of a metric ton of movie posters and gaming companies for various productions and projects, including some very recognizable ones. So by this stretch, I get to see the first runs of movie posters months before they roll out. Gaming company stuff too, before any major thing like E3 and the like. The funny thing is that it's the gaming companies that go nuts over our prints and secrecy to the point of roping off entire wings of a print floor and getting some big NDAs rolled out for us to sign if we work on them. The movie guys are a lot cooler about it. It's fun knowing some of the big announcements that will be hitting things like E3 or what the new blockbuster films have as far as advertising. Story 11 wasn't really a secret rather than it not hitting the stateside yet. My grandma came back from China with toys for me and my brother. They were Beyblades. These were legit compared to the ones that were released in America from what I assume were looser safety regulations. More durable plastic with a heavy metal weight in the center that was actually designed to create sparks when it hit the other Beyblade. We didn't understand what they were or how to play with them, so we kind of just shoved them underneath our beds until the anime became big. These things actually tore through the plastic on the American versions and actually made my brother bleed once. Story 12. Well, I was an intelligence analyst back in the 90s. After the Berlin Wall came down and the USSR turned into Russia with glasnost and perestroika and all that crap, everyone was like, the Cold War's over, yay. Even people in the military were on board, except for everybody that worked in intelligence. We were all like, nope, they're going to fall back, regroup, and keep coming at us. It never ended, folks. They just changed strategies. And it's not like we didn't try to warn people, just nobody gave a crap. I mean, nobody that mattered. Also, 9/11. I mean, not that specific attack. But we knew something like that was bound to happen after we destabilized Iraq. Saddam was a real son of a gun, but he kept a lockdown on his borders. After the Iraqi government collapsed, it was a highway for every two-bit jihadi looking to strap on and blow up some Yankees. And believe it or not, messing up countries and their economies, ending a bunch of non-combatants and turning into an eternal occupying force pisses people off enough to do that sort of thing. What I'm saying is that most of our current world political problems were not only entirely predictable, they were predicted. The decision makers were warned of the consequences and they did it anyway. Story 13. I used to work in a TV station that was a WB secondary affiliate. Our small rural market could not support a whole nother transmitter for them, meaning we'd tape the shows off the network's satellite feed and air them later that same week. So I was the first in the state to know if Dawson broke up with Joey or if Pacey had a nosebleed. The hassle, though, was that about twice every commercial break, they'd run a promo for some other show of theirs that we either skipped altogether or had already aired earlier, disturbing their pattern. I had to try to cover these promos with our own in-house ones. Of course, the tweens that had listservs or whatever about their favorite shows would get unintentional spoilers from the rest of the nation. My secret was only a secret within a 40-mile radius or dead zone. There were a few other first-run shows that studios, example, Fox, would feed to Canada on an encrypted satellite transponder ahead of their network airtime. They just did them at 6 a.m. on a Saturday when they figured no one would catch them. Oh, and I heard about George W. Bush's OUI conviction before the story broke on air. Story 14. Speaking for my late uncle, that GPS would become what it is today. He was on the Air Force team that created it to use in missile guidance. He must have known quite a bit about the project and its uses, as the government tapped his phone and occasionally had some fellas in a black SUV park in front of his home and follow him. I still remember the clicking noise the phone tap made when we would call him. My brother once called BS on the black SUV, saying it was probably a neighbor. My uncle said, watch this, picked up his phone and said, satellite, 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 and hung up. Then they got in his car and went for a drive around the city. The SUV followed noticeably and kept up with every weird, nonsensical lane change and turn for half an hour or so, until he headed for home. This was not the first time he had messed with them, either. He didn't like the close tabs Big Brother kept on him. He never did tell us the full extent of his knowledge, even after it became public, because he had been informed that he would be black-bagged and left to rot in a cell somewhere for the rest of his days. By the way, this was long before smartphones were a thing. Story 15. That there was going to be a sequel to the show Avatar, The Last Airbender. In high school, I mentioned in an assignment that it was one of my favorite shows, and my English teacher told me her cousin was one of the creators, Brian Konietzko. A little while later, she told me that she heard that they got approval to do a mini-series about the next Avatar, Korra. This was about 1.5 years before the official announcement. I tried to leak the news on every fan forum, on DeviantArt, and everywhere else 14-year-old me went to on the internet back then, but had so little internet cred or actual proof that no one believed me. This was also around the time when everyone was still depressed about the Shyamalan movie adaptation as well. Too bad I ended up massively disappointed in T-Log when it actually came out. Story 16. I had an interview at a land surveying company a while back, just after Disney bought the Star Wars franchise. I was talking to the interviewer and asking him various questions and just having an all-around general talk. He mentioned he was in the middle of doing an extremely large project at Disney, but that's all he could say. It comes to be revealed a little while later that Disney is opening a Star Wars section for their parks. I guess I wasn't directly told that Disney was going to be revealing a Star Wars section, but I was basically told, yeah, something big is coming soon. Story 17. One that never became public knowledge. Many years ago, a senior politician who had a hard-on for trying to get a goods and services tax introduced against the entire country's opposition, managed to get elected to the position of national leader, partly by promising that there would never, ever be such a tax. While he was proclaiming that a team specifically designed to implement and administer that very same tax was being assembled in the National Tax Department. I knew because I was in the IT team for that department and was the guy sent to oversee the spinning up of the main server for this new team. The team was hidden in the back rooms of a building in the capital city, which was up front, rented by the tax department. To cover the fact that all the new interiors, outfitting, and furniture were being trucked into the building, they simultaneously built a very public general assistance frontage in the front part of the building, opening to the street and with the tax department's logo over everything. Thus, no one questioned all the builders and so forth, traipsing in and out of the building, or all the decor and tax department colors being carried in. No one watched the frontage long enough to realize that there was about 5 times too much equipment and interior fit-out components going into the building for a small information kiosk-style office. Of course, much later, the tax was announced publicly to the anger of the vast majority of the population and, oh gosh, look at that. All the paperwork and structures had already been set up, almost like an entire floor of people had been working on it for a year already. How did that happen? Story 18. When I was a fairly junior computer technician in my early 20s, I was doing some work for a small city in Texas. It was so small that the city hall only had like 6 or 7 employees, not including the mayor. All of their computers were used for accounting purposes like mailing water bills and keeping track of specific budgets for public works. Pretty standard stuff. During the process of troubleshooting an issue with their accounting software, I was fairly sure that the guy who ran the city hall office had been embezzling money from the city. I told the mayor, but she didn't really seem interested. Being so young, I didn't really know what to do and wasn't confident enough in the discovery to push it any further. I politely dropped them as clients to put distance between myself and their impending crap storm. Several years later, I saw him being arrested on TV for theft of public funds, and the mayor was also under investigation. It caused something of a crisis in the little town. I regret not going to the FBI or something. Story 19. A friend of mine cryptically told me to remember the phrase Trappist one morning. That evening, I got a breaking news alert that the Trappist telescope had discovered 7 planets around a star it had named Trappist 1. My mind was blown. Turns out he'd got a summer placement with one of the guys involved in studying it, as well as being in a student society that had booked him to talk on exoplanets, but with no specifics. And he managed to work out what the discovery was by joining the dots with some of what the placement supervisor had said. Story 20. My dad used to work for General Mills, and when I was a young kid, like maybe 6 years old, my dad volunteered us, me and my siblings, to taste test different versions of French Toast Crunch before it was launched. I remember my dad telling me to not tell anyone about it because the product wasn't official yet. Me and my siblings had to eat one version of the cereal for several days before trying the next one. I think there were 3 versions altogether, if I remember correctly. And after all were tried, we had to write our thoughts on each one and which we liked the best. Honestly, I was so young that I had no idea what to write or even how to articulate myself on the subtleties and flavors, and honestly, they all tasted the same to me. So I just made stuff up and called it a day. Story 21. I used to work for EA. Not only did EA use college athlete likenesses for NCAA football, they used their race, skin tone, hometown height, weight, and of course their position and number. In fact, one of the duties assigned for a tester every year was to input the names of the entire NCAA roster instead of the position plus number that read when the game shipped. Every single player and every team, we then copied that memory card so that everyone had the game with every unpaid athlete's name for every team already on their jersey on day 1. Since then, they were sued for not compensating college athletes, and at one point, their defense was they did not ever use player likenesses in the game. Story 22. I knew about the 13,000-year-old mastodon site and the importance of it rewriting our understanding of hominids here on this continent, years before it was made public, but maintained quasi-secrecy until the info was published. Human beings only really evolved as we know them in the last 50,000 years or so, and really solidified in the last ice age. But anatomically modern humans had been around between 200 to 300,000 of years ago. The move out of Africa and somehow making it all the way over to what is now known as the area around San Diego, CA, is nothing more than mind-boggling, and this pushes the timeline back further than anything previously imagined. So this was perhaps some other hominid species other than humans. That went and ended or scavenged a mastodon, butchered the carcass with tools, and arranged the bones in a specific way to mark the site. We don't know, we just know it was something that used crude tools like later known human sites did. It's one of those things that when sitting around with friends always brings up the explanation of some far-fetched alien or time traveler crashing and being trapped in the past as a what if.